there's been quite a week in politics. The Prime Minister's gone away, Chippy's in China, but things are starting to fall at home. Yesterday, the Privileges Committee gave its verdict on Jan Tinetti, the Education Minister, and this morning, can I say, for those of you who haven't caught up with it, there have been new revelations, incredible revelations in actual fact, printed by Stuff this morning, quoting unnamed senior civil servants as to the behaviour of Justice Minister Kiri Allan. Yes, that issue we all thought might have gone away yesterday has been inflamed this morning. Joining us to talk about this and the general state of Parliament at the moment is Michael Woodhouse, National MP and the Opposition Shadow House Leader. Good morning to you, Michael.
Good morning, Michael.
First of all,
can you hear
these
me?
new revelations to... Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Great, yes, coming through.
Excellent. These new revelations, which you would have probably caught up this morning, because I'm sure the first thing you do is look at your media, to do with Kiri Allan. Does that suggest this issue is going to continue as to her behaviour with her staff in the Beehive quarters?
Yeah, look, I think we're going to hear a few more chapters to be written about this. The Minister back at Parliament yesterday was before the Economic Development Select Committee yesterday. Simeon Brown, my colleague, tried to elicit some kind of detail about a text between senior officials and wasn't able to do that. The Minister is saying, well, it's a robust place, but her office is generally, very positive. Well, that's going to jar with some of the revelations that have come out over the last 24 hours that I have picked up on this morning, and we'll be hearing a lot more about that. Look, as you know, Parliament's a pretty robust place, and in a minister's offices, times when a minister is having to be pretty clear and direct with his officials about carrying out government policy. But there's ways to do that. These guys work really hard on behalf of the New Zealand taxpayer, and they don't deserve to be berated in the way that some of the reports have suggested. So I think we do need to get to the bottom of that, and we'll be hearing more about it.
No, I suspect you're right. The other thing, of course, and you would be well aware of this as well, is Parliament is a very stressful existence. And I imagine ministers' offices are even doubly stressful given the priorities, as you mentioned, sometimes the dynamic tension between government departments and ministers, but also just the media and, well, life in general. And then other life intrudes, for example, Kiri Allan's marriage, her partnership is broken up with her long-term partner.
Her engagement.
Do we need to be careful about
That's right,
that? I mean, do we need to actually understand that these people are human?
Look, I think I've been there nearly 15 years, and there's no doubt that there have been quite positive steps taken to make the place a bit more family friendly. We never meet when school holidays are on. We've reduced the amount of urgency that we do, and I think there is a slightly better work-life balance. But we choose a life that, by its nature, does come at a cost to the time we can spend with our families. I'm still in Wellington. I'll be heading home to Dunedin later on this afternoon. But, I haven't seen family since Monday. So, that's the stress. But none of that, it may explain, but does not excuse taking out our frustrations or our stresses on the staff that work in our office. And I think it's a simple courtesy that we have to extend to the people around us, that whatever's going on in our own professional and personal worlds, we don't take that into our office. Now, we had the Debbie Francis report 4 or 5 years ago, and that made some recommendations about how things could be improved, and there's no doubt that the culture of Parliament has improved. But I don't think you're ever going to get to a point where it's a typical workplace. It's not going to be Pricewaterhouse. It's not going to be the local retailer, because those pressures are different, and we've got to be very cognizant of that and the impact of our reactions and our behaviours as public leaders that would have on the people around us.
Which brings me nicely to the next point, which is the Education Minister Jan Tinetti appearing in front of the Privileges Committee, essentially for not telling the truth. Now, tell us a little bit about the Privileges Committee first, because most of us don't really understand it. Who sits on that Privileges Committee, Michael?
So there are 8 members of the Privileges Committee. There are 4 Labour MPs. There are 2 National MPs, 1 ACT MP and a Green MP. It's chaired by David Parker, and I am the Deputy Chair. And it exists because MPs have very high level of privilege to speak in the House and in select committees free from fear of consequences that might occur outside that place. And that's why it's called a privilege. But with that goes some responsibility, and that is firstly to be honest and tell the truth. And importantly, when statements are made that may be incorrect or misleading, that they are quickly corrected. Now that's politics 101. It's stressed to MPs in their inductions. It's reinforced by senior whips and so on, and it's pretty well known. Now, on this occasion, the minister, by her own admission, did mislead the House in an answer she gave to a question about what influence she had over timing the release of quite damning attendance data with a more than $70 million announcement that the government was making around managing truancy. And the dates just looked too cute, frankly. And so Erica Stanford, my colleague, drilled into that, and she was steadfast in her belief that that was purely a coincidence. She went back to her office and was told by her staff, actually, Minister, we have been donkey deep in this. We've been talking not only to the ministry but to the Prime Minister's office. Sorry we didn't tell you, but your answer was actually misleading. She decided that because the answer was, in her mind, consistent with her belief about what was going on at the time she gave the answer, that she did not need to correct it. And that was fundamentally wrong. It was referred to the Select Committee because of the weight of information that we had, that actually her staff were really involved in this, and that's where the process started.
I'm looking at the membership of that Privileges Committee, though. Jan Tinetti is a Minister of the Crown. At what point do you actually drop your party labels when you walk into a meeting like that? Because yesterday you decided that she was grossly negligent but not enough to be censured. And I'm thinking, just quietly, as I'm sure everybody else is, there was probably some good and spectacular horse trading behind the scenes in that Privileges Committee. Would I be right to come to that sort of conclusion?
Yeah, you'd be absolutely right. Now, firstly, it's important to say that the report that was released yesterday represents the consensus position of all members on that committee. There's no minority report. There's one small reference to some of us, which is a term that we use. But I got to tell you, Michael, we struggled to get to the position because it was difficult, and I'll tell you why. In order for the committee to reach the finding of not deliberately misleading the House, which is the real breach and the contempt, we had to accept that 3 things were true. Firstly, that between January and the 21st of February, her staff were deeply involved in influencing the timing of the release, including correspondence with both the Ministry and the Prime Minister's office. Secondly, that on the 21st of February, when she was on Breakfast TV, and said that the data would be released later that day, that she, quote, made that up under pressure from questioning by media. And then that thirdly, when her officer's involvement in this was pointed out to her after question time, she took the view that because she had an honest belief when she gave the answer, she didn't need to correct it. Now, those three things, frankly, to me, stretched the bounds of credibility.
Oh, yeah.
But
wouldn't work in a court of law, mate.
Relies on. Well, I tell you what, we yes, well, that's right. But as you know, the place runs on the honesty of members. And so having been brought to the Privileges Committee around questions about her honesty, there was a point where, okay, let's just put the facts out there. Let's, for the sake of this, accept that those 3 things are correct, and then make our determination on that. So as a consequence, we couldn't get to a finding of contempt. We couldn't get a finding of deliberately misleading, but there's some pretty damning language in this report.
Accept it. All right. She's damaged from it. Chippy's still in China. He doesn't need these ministers going AWOL, whether it's Kerry Allen or Jan Tinetti or Stuart Nash or Meta Whaitiri. what's the impression? I mean, the impression that the public is picking up, as you can imagine, is not complimentary of the management of Labor's senior ranks. But will it have any political effect upon us?
Yeah, I think it will. I think governments are more likely to lose elections than oppositions win them. That's the old adage. And I don't think it really matters where the Prime Minister is. He's having to deal with this. It's not as if his presence in the country was going to change the events that went on this week. He would have probably been a little closer to media to address it, but you can't hose down a fire that's out of control just because you're a little closer to the beehive than he currently is. This is a pattern, and I reckon it's a pattern of ministers and members of the Labour caucus simply thinking that the rules don't apply to them. They've got in there with an agenda. They want to actually carry it out, and that pesky media and opposition that keep asking them questions about process, as we have with, for example, the Provincial Growth Fund, or conflicts of interest, as we have with Michael Wood and Nanaia Mahuta and a few others probably, where Stuart Nash leaks from cabinet to funders that somehow these rules aren't written for them. Well, I can tell you, when I became a minister, John Key sat me down, handed me the cabinet manual and said, mate, you read that cover to cover and you understand it and you abide by it, or I'm going to boot you out the door. It's as simple as that. And actually, they're not difficult rules to follow. They're not that difficult. So where the Prime Minister is actually not central to the issue of a set of ministers that are just above the rules.
So today, Parliament must have finished for this particular session. You must be now having 2 weeks for school holidays. You're back in 2 weeks, yeah?
Yeah, we are. For 2 weeks for school holidays. It's going to be busy. I'm on the road most of the next week, and then a couple of days of downtime. But of course, the backdrop to that is planning for election campaigning, which is well underway, as you can imagine. But when we get back a fortnight on Tuesday, we will have probably 6 sitting weeks. We're going into extended hours. The government desperately wants to get its legislative agenda through, so things like Three Waters, the reform of the RMA, and a few other set pieces. So they're going to keep us very, very busy. I think that absolute determination to clear the decks reflects a reasonably high level of likelihood in Grant Robertson's mind. He's the leader of the House, that then if they don't get them done before the election, they're not going to get done.
Well, wouldn't be such a bad thing when it comes to Three Waters, or even the RMA for that matter.
Quite
but
right.
You and I would have views on that. Michael, thank you very much for joining us. Oh, listen, just before you go, you had a vandal sort of attack on your office this week. Somebody decided to drive a pilotless car into your office. Is that right?
Yeah, we thought it was going to be described as a ram raid, and actually one reporter called it an unintentional ram raid. You know the city, I don't know if you know where my office is, but in Stafford Street, across the intersection from my front window, it's quite a sloping street at the bottom there, and there was a car that had been broken into and somebody was rummaging around, and in the process of that let the handbrake off. The car reversed backward at quite a rate of knots through the intersection, missed all the lampposts and any traffic that was around, and slammed pretty forcefully into my front window. So it was a damn nuisance, to be honest. The good thing was it was at 2:30 in the morning, and the likelihood of somebody being injured or killed was pretty low at that time. But police did a great job. They're taking the incident very seriously. They're scanning CCTV. I've got CCTV from my office, but it doesn't have any individuals in the frame, but it shows a pretty dramatic scene as the car hits the window. So here, it's just one of those things that happens. Could have been any office.
All right. Yeah, that's true. Best of luck to you. Have a very good weekend. Thank you very much for talking to us this morning, Michael.
Cheers, Michael. It's a pleasure.
Good on you. That's the opposition leader of the House, National Party MP. He's actually based in Dunedin. Has been, I think, ever since. Michael's been a list MP, Michael Woodhouse, been a list MP, from day one. I mean, I think the last National MP that Labour, that National elected out of Dunedin would have been Richard Walls. Do you remember that? No, of course you don't. 1975. He was a one-term MP. They kicked him out in 78, and there's never been anything other than a Labour MP representing the Dunedin constituency since. That's 45 years. Yeah, 45 years. Hasn't been any other colour but red coming out of Dunedin. All right, it is 11 minutes to 8. Listen, if you want to comment on any of these issues this morning, text 5050, or you can give me a call, 0800 33 22 83, 0800 debate, and particularly on the Chris Cahill interview this morning. Some interesting information there. I thought Chris Cahill was actually quite brave and honest. He is, after all, representing frontline police, but he doesn't really take too many prisoners. And it was an overwhelmingly negative assessment, I think, of police leadership at the moment, and of policy, government policy in particular, related to police. You would expect, wouldn't you, if you were devising a law and order policy, and ironically, a previous president of the Police Association actually is in the Labour Party caucus currently, although I suspect he's not listened to very often, Greg O'Connor. I think he's the Member of Parliament for Ohariu in Wellington. But you would expect, if you were going to devise that sort of policy, the first people you go and talk to are those responsible for the day-to-day policing. I guess what they do is they go to Police Commissioner Costa, hold up in his Molesworth Street Eyrie in Wellington, and go and ask him. But the suggestion that that Police Commissioner Costa and that the Police Association are on the same page would, I think, have been well and truly voided, or if that perception existed, it would have been voided by listening to that interview with Chris Cahill this morning.